It's another analysis video on another defeat for Newcastle United. They're second in a row and 5 games without a win now, after they were beaten at Chelsea. In this video I'm going to examine exactly how it happened and tell you about the big problem I have with Newcastle at the moment. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another Newcastle United analysis video, picking up the pieces after yet another defeat again, and this one kind of went exactly as I expected. If you haven't checked out my live reaction straight after the final whistle yesterday, do that please. But the big tactical issue that I think Newcastle faced in this game, and they were always going to face in this game, Eddie Howe and his tactical rigidness, the fact that he is a systems manager, not a principles manager, and he tries to fit everything into the same system regardless of who plays. The substitutions are often very much the same. There's not much variety in the play, but there's also not much change when an opposition's strengths will expose their weaknesses, and I think that's exactly what happened in this game. Newcastle played a high line in defence against Nicholas Jackson up front, a really pacey, young, energetic striker in great form, a lot of confidence, with two over 30 centre-backs in Dan Burn and Fabian Schär, and then played a midfield that was very flat, very uninspiring, not very much closing down, not very much energy, not much of a high press, and the result of that was a lot of space for Chelsea to expose and a lot of freedom for particularly Cole Palmer to run ragged, and that's what happened. He laid the ball on for the first goal with a superb, exquisite pass. He didn't even need the space in that instance, and really it showed what he can do. 75 seconds into the second half, Alexander Isak's robbed, he gets the ball, he runs 20 yards unopposed and finds the bottom corner to win the game for Chelsea in the end. And I think ultimately that's my biggest issue with this game. And yes, we can talk about recruitment, yes, we can talk about the deep-rooted issues of Eddie Howe, whether Eddie Howe should be sacked as manager. Incidentally, I'm recording this just as Erik ten Hag has left Manchester United. There's some lessons there potentially for Newcastle with what Manchester United are going to face in the next few weeks as they look for a long-term replacement. Obviously Ruud van Nistelrooy is taking interim charge, but what Newcastle may face if they do decide to part company with Eddie Howe down the line, that isn't going to happen now. It's still a few weeks or possibly months away from that. Hopefully he turns it round. I've given my thoughts on that on True Faith and on here that I think he still deserves a bit of time, but patience is wearing thin, and the problem is for me that the same recurring issues are happening, and I think that was best really shown in the game on Sunday at Stamford Bridge. Newcastle, as I said, their high line was far too slow. Dan Burn didn't want to get pulled into midfield, but he had to do that to try and close the gap for Cole Palmer and the players, and the interlinking players as well, because it wasn't just Cole Palmer, it was Cole Palmer being able to find the space and then constantly finding Noni Madueke, constantly finding Pedro Neto out wide, and then subsequently Jackson as well. That was what led to the first goal, and then obviously the second goal was a mistake, but running at the heart of that midfield again with absolutely no closing down. And this is a deep-rooted issue. We've been here talking about Morgan Gibbs-White exposing that space. We've been here talking about Emil Smith-Rowe earlier this season at Fulham exposing that space. Plenty of players have done that across that line, in that space between the Newcastle's defence and attack, and lots of people said that, well, number 6 is the right answer, and potentially that's an argument I've made on this channel before and it's been poured over quite a lot, but I don't think that that's the issue. I think that the midfield patently doesn't work in its current form. Joe Linton, Bruno and Tonali, I said that last week about Longstaff and what he maybe brings in terms of tying things together. And no, people in the comments don't rate Longstaff. He came on yesterday, made a few missed passes, and there are obvious issues when he's on the ball and he's in possession, and nobody's saying, I think, that he's the long-term answer here. But what he does do is he ties things together and allows other players to play their game better. At the moment, Tonali, Joe Linton and Bruno all do their job separately and do it fairly well. In the, particularly with Tonali, I think he's tidy on the ball. I think Joe Linton still continues to struggle in this midfield setup as well. But it's not necessarily about those three players individually, it's how they knit together and what they do as a unit. I think that's part of the issue. There was very little pressing, very little energy in the midfield to shut down the space. That forced the high line and forced Dan Burn and Fabian Schär into midfield, which then gave Jackson the space to run in behind, and it was constantly happening. And Chelsea got wise to it. I saw it 5 or 6 times where Newcastle's passes into the midfield from Burn and Schär, who are neither in a particularly adept at that, particularly Burn. He really struggles with that, I think. And the passes were just picked off, and Chelsea were constantly running at Newcastle. They were facing Newcastle's back line consistently, and that was what ultimately, I think, because going forward, Newcastle were fairly decent at spells after the first 20 minutes. When they conceded for the next 10-15 minutes each time, they were extremely ragged. They looked like they could be beaten comfortably. Then they sort of regained themselves, and Chelsea themselves have some issues in defence, and they are poor at the back, and Newcastle exposed that obviously with the equaliser, and then they created a few chances in the second half. It wasn't Alexander Isak's best game, despite the fact that he scored his second goal of the season. Obviously he was the one who made the mistake for Palmer's goal, and also he failed to score that chance when he rounded the keeper, when he really should have either played it into Longstaff or Joelinton, who were free in the middle. That was poor, but the attacking play, there was a lot of decent things. The goal was a fantastic link up. I think Lewis Hall is Newcastle's best player down that left hand side. Going forward, he still was exposed a little bit, and Madueke had a little bit of too much of a say in the game going forward, I think, for Chelsea. But in terms of what Lewis Hall did in attack, I was really impressed with that. Tonali was neat and tidy. I think he can improve, and I think he will improve in time, but again came off after 67 minutes for Longstaff. And yeah, I think things did start to tighten up a little bit there, but I don't see Tonali coming out of the team as the right answer either. I think it's maybe a Joelinton issue. It's maybe not even bringing Longstaff in. It's maybe working at a different way of setting this team up and finding a way to work. But the biggest issue I have is that this system patently isn't working. You're not getting the benefits out of those midfielders. You're not getting the benefits out of a high line. You're only exposing your own weaknesses and making it easier for the opposition. Yes, Chelsea had their flaws yesterday. It wasn't their best performance. They were ragged a little bit at times in the second half, and it looked like there was a chance for Newcastle to get something out of the game. So it wasn't the worst performance in the world. There were some positives if you take the game in its individual context, but those positives pale into insignificance when the team is making the same mistakes and the long-term issues and the deep-rooted issues with the team. And I do just want to say something else as well. I think lots of people have said that this is where, if you look at the squad, this is where Newcastle are as a reality, and this is where Chelsea are as a reality. It was always going to be difficult. We all know that Newcastle overachieved when they reached the Champions League in 2022. We all know that that was the case. But they haven't done what they needed to do, and they've been given a great opportunity which they've squandered to make that better. I mean, lots of teams who overachieve in that instance, and you even see it with Aston Villa, they finished fourth and have had to sell Douglas Luiz and have had to sell Moussa Diaby to deal with PSR. Newcastle have finished fourth, finished seventh, and still managed to keep Botman, Bruno, Isak, Gordon. There's a core of really, really, really great players who are Champions League quality. Usually in the instance of a team overachieving, they're picked dry by vultures and bigger teams. That hasn't happened, and yet they've also had another £200 million opportunity to spend £200 million on top of that in 3 windows. 150 roughly in 2022, where they made some difficult and I would say wrong decisions, signing Harvey Barnes. To do with Barnes himself, although I thought he was poor yesterday. Generally speaking, it's to do with the position and signing a second left midfielder instead of a right midfielder. Livramento, there was a question mark over him at the time. He's obviously going to become a really key player for Newcastle going forward, but at the time there were bigger issues in terms of spending £40 million that could have gone on a different option for the first team in a more immediate sense. And then this summer they squandered the opportunity to spend £70 million. As I said previously, my issue with the transfers and recruitment is that Newcastle's best signings have been £30 to £40 million, with Isak being the outlier. There's enough money there to spend on. £200 million gets you 4 or 5, 6, possibly even different players of the value of someone like Botman and Bruno. If you're clever enough and you're proactive enough, which they were in the first half of the first phase of the takeover, up until 2022, that stopped, and I think that's ultimately the issue. Not many teams are given the opportunity to miss out on Champions League football and keep the spine of the team that they have, like Isak, Gordon, Bruno. As I've said previously, Liverpool, Manchester City and Arsenal fans would love for those 3 signings to be made for their teams. They absolutely were desperate for those players to join their clubs in the summer, and it didn't happen. Newcastle were able to keep them That's a great opportunity, and there was and that's my biggest issue. Yes, Newcastle, it's difficult to expect them to have a bench and a quality of squad like Chelsea, because Chelsea have spent £1 billion and they've underachieved, by the way, as well. They're still underachieving for the money that they've spent, even though Enzo Maresca is definitely getting a tune out of them. But it's not about matching Chelsea. It's about whether they've done everything that they can to make themselves better. And I think that off the pitch they haven't, in terms of the boardroom and recruitment, but also on the pitch in terms of Eddie Howe. He was really innovative that first season as well. He's part of this issue. That team in that first 18 months to 2 years reacted to different games. It played to their strengths. It found a way to get the best out of the team. Now it feels like Eddie Howe's got one system that needs to work regardless of who was in the team. I said that last week about when Miley and Longstaff were in midfield together, trying to press high, trying to play an energetic, expansive game in midfield. It just didn't suit them. They were better at keeping possession, keeping things tight, slowing the game down. And this, just like this defence, there's no way that Dan Burn and Fabian Schär are suited to a high line, but they have to play it. We've seen it this season when they've played deeper. That's really suited Dan Burn. That's why Dan Burn's been the best player that Newcastle have had this season. But I think that they should have approached this game with a little bit more sense and tried their best to shut this game down and hit Chelsea more on a counter-attack from a lower block. But if you are going to go for a high line, don't do it with two ageing, slow centre-backs. But if you are going to do that, then you need more pressing and more energy from the midfield. So this game really came down to that for me. And every time Cole Palmer got the ball, he didn't need any help, but he had so much help. He was surrounded by 5-10 yards of space every time. Madueke was able to run off him as a result. Neto was able to run off him as a result. Jackson was able to run off him as a result. It wasn't just the 2 goals, but in the first 20 minutes it happened consistently. They needed to build a little bit more from a deeper midfield base, I think, to have more of an opportunity. Deep-rooted issues we know about recruitment. As I say, Newcastle have failed to take advantage of a real opportunity. The fact that Newcastle have managed to keep these players, and we're already seeing it with the Isak contract rumblings, and we've already seen it with the talk of Liverpool and Gordon and Bruno and Manchester City. Those clubs are going to come back for those players. And yes, they're not performing themselves at the moment either, and they do have to take their share of responsibility. But the fact is that Newcastle have managed to keep them for 2 years since being in the Champions League, and they've had £200 million to spend on the squad, and they've made poor decisions that have ultimately cost them. There was still no pace in the defence. That really needs to be sorted, and even when Botman comes back, that'll still need to be sorted. Even when Lascelles comes back, it'll still need to be sorted. There's still no quality on that right hand side. And Miguel Almiron came in yesterday, didn't do much, but Jacob Murphy hasn't really impressed. It was a shame that Anthony Gordon was unfit, but Harvey Barnes didn't take his opportunity on the left. And that extra quality up front, as I say, Isak had a difficult game, but he did score. But some more quality off the bench to offer something different, some more variety. And it feels like Newcastle should have a squad, and they've had an opportunity to build that squad that they've squandered, to do different things and have answers for different problems on the pitch. Eddie Howe has not got those answers at the moment, and I think that's where the problems are coming. There's Chelsea again in midweek in the Carabao Cup, then there's Arsenal, then there's Nottingham Forest, and then it's the international break, and it could really be crunch time if the results don't go Newcastle's way. So this is another frustrating game that I saw coming. It happened the way I expected it to, especially when Dan Burn and Fabian Schär were expected to play a high line and pass balls into the midfield, to a midfield that was disjointed as it was. There was no one coming deep for that. So it was every opportunity Chelsea were given space in the key areas, which Cole Palmer, Jackson, Neto and Madueke all took advantage of, and ultimately that led to Newcastle United's defeat. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe, and please also do get involved with this new project I'm looking to do on the weekends. I'll be going to different games at different levels across England and across Europe, covering different football matches, giving my thoughts on very different environments, and I'm really looking forward to that. Please do like, share and subscribe for more of that, and I'll see you next time, which will hopefully be live reaction to Newcastle United's game against Chelsea straight after the final whistle on Wednesday night at St James's Park. See you later.